week 14 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few running backs I have as sleepers this week. The first back since here, McCormick of the Las Vegas Raiders. McCormick out there in 97% of fantasy leagues. In the last 2 weeks, he's definitely getting the football, and he's made the most of his opportunities. I know Alexander Mattison, Zamir White possibly could return in this ball game for this Vegas Raider team, but at this point they signed him to the active roster, and I believe he's going to get touches in this game regardless. Week 12 versus Denver, 5 carries, 33 yards. And last week in a ball game that the Raiders arguably could have won, 12 carries, 64 yards, 2 catches, and a receiving yard. So this week a decent matchup at the Bucs on paper. 9th most fantasy points to running backs on the season. And McCormick, he showed some flash. He showed some speed. I know he's a smaller back, but like I said, this Raider team all season long had trouble running the football. And to be honest, McCormick looked like it was one of the better running ball games from this Raider backfield all season. So right now, if you need a deep sleeper, he's out there in 97% of fantasy leagues. Back Patrick Taylor of the San Francisco 49ers. So now we know McCaffrey out for the regular season, Jordan Mason on IR, Isaac Guerendo next man up, and I think he's going to be fine for this 49er team. But Patrick Taylor is a guy who's gotten some work as well when there was injuries for this Niner team. Going back to week 6, 5 carries, 16 yards a catch, 12 yards in a game where Jordan Mason went down and Guerendo and Taylor got some work. And then week 8 versus the Cowboys, 2 carries, 9 yards. So now he's going to be back on the active roster off the practice squad. Here's Patrick Taylor. And this week it's a pretty decent matchup versus Chicago Bears. They give up the 11th most fantasy points to backs on the season. So Taylor, obviously a deep sleeper. I believe Guerendo is going to get 90% of the touches in this ball game. But let's say Guerendo goes down. He's the next man up is Patrick Taylor. And like I said, he might be involved in this ball game more than people think. So right now, well, he's out there in 99% of fantasy leagues, and he's obviously a deep sleeper option this week is Taylor, but it wouldn't be surprising to me if he gets some touches in this ball game. And the final running back I have as a sleeper is Blake Corum of the Los Angeles Rams. So Blake Corum, he's starting to get more work over the last few weeks for this Ram team. Last week he had a couple series, he was in there, and he finished the ball game with 8 carries, 42 yards. So they were impressed with Corum, and I actually thought he'd have more of a role coming out of training camp and preseason, even though we know Kyren Williams last season had the monster year and was one of the better running backs in fantasy football. So Corum out there in tons of fantasy leagues at 85%. And if you think he's going to go out there and get an opportunity, it's a decent matchup on paper, believe it or not, versus the Bills. I give up the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs on the season. But Kyren Williams last week, one of his best games of the year. Corum I still think is going to mix in. But like say if you're in a deep flex league with 2 or 3 flexes, you start him with all these bye weeks, have no choice but to put him in as a sleeper. But he's definitely a deep sleeper option as well. So that's a few running backs I have as sleepers for week 14 of the fantasy football season.